Hey everyone,
I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries and Happy New Year, wishing you the very best for 2026. Now, it was the 30th of December and it was finally time for me to tear myself away from the wonderful family of Eulysses, Vitelma and Sandra. They had invited me to come and spend New Year with them. However, I had my sights set on Cartagena, which is Colombia's colonial gem on the Caribbean coast. Cartagena is known for its gorgeous colonial architecture and its Caribbean vibes that pulse through the street any time of the day or night. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. From the moment I arrived, I felt the energy shift from the mountain city vibes of Bucaramanga to the warm tropical embrace of the Caribbean coast. Stay tuned because you are going to want to see what Cartagena looks like at this time of year. But before we go on, I'm going to take this opportunity to please ask you to like my video, subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive updates when I upload new videos as part of this series. And if you like what you're seeing, please share my content and tell your family and friends about it. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel and it means a lot to me. So I woke up in Ocaña very early to get on a van at about 6 a.m. which would drive me the 1 hour to the highway junction town of Aguachica. My plan was to hop onto a bus leaving around 10 a.m. which would get me into Cartagena in the evening around 7 or 8 p.m. However, when I arrived at the bus station in Aguachica, I was told that the bus which was due to pick us up at 10 a.m. was actually still somewhere on the other side of Bogota, at least 10 hours drive away. So one of the representatives from the bus company said that he might be able to get me onto a bus at about 4 p.m. But that still meant that I would be arriving into Cartagena quite late. Anyway, it was what it was. So I waited at the Aguachica bus station. I walked around town for a little bit and got a bite to eat, but waited most of the day in the Aguachica bus station, which isn't air conditioned, until 4 p.m. when the bus finally arrived. I finally got onto the bus, ironically the first bit of air conditioning that I'd had all of that day, and the bus sped across the lowlands towards Cartagena and got in at about 3 a.m., where I was staying at the Los Patios hostel. Luckily, the hostel had been kind enough to inform their security guard of my late arrival, so he stayed up to make sure that I was let in and showed me to my room. When I finally arrived at my bed, I was utterly exhausted, but I was also very excited because I knew that what lay ahead was a day of exploring Cartagena's colonial charms. Los Patios Hostel in Cartagena also has a lovely cafe attached, which I went to for breakfast the next morning. I woke up early and yes, I was tired because I hadn't slept that much, but realistically I knew that I only really had allowed myself one day to really explore Cartagena, and that was New Year's Eve. I had planned and hoped to have more time in Cartagena. However, I don't regret spending as much time as I did in Santander with Jimmy's family. That was just awesome. On my first morning in Cartagena, I remember overhearing an Australian traveler talking about how he had been chased through the streets of Cartagena the night before by someone with a weapon. When you arrive in a new city, you hear stories and you sort of think, okay, well, maybe that's something to be aware of. And then as the story progressed, he revealed that actually the person who was chasing him with the weapon was actually someone who he'd set up a drug deal with. And, oh my God, they turned out to be a thug. Who'd have thought? After breakfast, I set off to explore the old town of Cartagena. Cartagena is famous for its UNESCO World Heritage listed historic center, and it's easy to see why. The streets are lined with colonial mansions painted in every color imaginable, balconies overflowing with flowers, vines and creepers, and doors that are almost too beautiful to just walk past. And in the Caribbean sun, street vendors calling out their wares, roving musicians playing everything from cumbia to reggaeton, African beats, and cozy cafes and bars spilling out onto the streets. And you have an old town that feels alive at every corner. It was the perfect spot to soak in the atmosphere and get ready for New Year's Eve, with the Caribbean breeze, cobblestone streets, and colourful facades providing the ultimate backdrop for the celebrations to come. Cartagena is not just a pretty city, but it's also a city steeped in history. It was one of the most important Spanish colonial ports on the Caribbean, and as such, like many cities of its day, the walls and fortresses still stand as a reminder of those colonial days. It's also a city with a darker past, because it's also through here that the Spanish Empire transferred many of their slaves who had been kidnapped from Africa. But Cartagena is far from frozen in history. As a port city, it has always had an ever-changing and dynamic population, welcoming people from different regions, countries, and cultures. This multi-ethnic makeup, combined with the layers of history, has created a city that is both colourful and vibrant. Everywhere you look, you can see the influences of its diverse past. It's all one big rich tapestry that makes Cartagena one of Colombia's most vivid cities. I have this sort of abstract idea that after traveling for a long time, your body sort of builds up stress, tension, the dust from the road, and there's something really cathartic about coming to the coast and being able to release that. And although I wasn't swimming in the Caribbean in Cartagena, Cartagena's a great city, but there are better beaches elsewhere on the Caribbean coast. So although I wasn't swimming in Cartagena, there was something really cathartic about being there. I sort of felt like this sense of arrival, that I was ready to greet the new year, standing there at sea level on the coast, and I was able to release any tension, any stress, and the dust, the sweat, everything that had sort of built up on the road over the past few weeks. This was a sense that I got in Mexico when I finished up on the Yucatan Peninsula, and it's something that I was really feeling here as well. As I wandered through the city that day, I found myself wandering through narrow streets lined with colonial mansions. These streets felt almost like corridors where the gabled roofs and ornate balconies created a rhythmic channel to move through. People were sitting on balconies, enjoying meals, chatting, or simply taking in the day. The aroma of local Caribbean cuisine floated through the streets. Coconut rice, pulled beef, fresh fish, all spilling out from kitchens and eateries onto the streets, filling the air with a tantalizing scent. Eventually, I arrived at the edge of the city walls. Standing there on the edge of the fortress, looking out over the coast, I watched the last sunset of the year. It was magical. Time seemed to stand still, and in that moment, the city, the coast, and the day all merged into something timeless. A perfect pause before welcoming a new year. As I was walking the streets, I was also acutely aware that I needed to continue with my arepa quest, and Cartagena is home to two local types of arepas. The arepa de huevo, which is an arepa with an egg inside of it, and then the whole thing is deep fried. This calorific snack is something people rave about, but it wasn't really my favorite. I'm not a huge fan of fried eggs, and I'm a bit picky when it comes to fried street snacks. I enjoy samosas in Pakistan, but honestly, fried street snacks don't appeal to me that much, to be honest, and this was just a little bit too much for me. Later that evening, I went back to the hostel, changed, and then hit the city to spend New Year's Eve with a friend. While I was out there, I needed a quick snack, and so I came across arepas de queso costeño, an arepa with a semi-soft cheese native to the Caribbean region. This was absolutely delicious. I even went back for another. It was the perfect fuel to get me ready for a night of celebrating. So I headed downtown and managed to catch up with Juliana, who was my friend from Bogota, you might remember. She had told me in advance that she was planning to spend New Year's Eve with her family in Cartagena. So we met up and sat together waiting for the moment to ring in the new year. In Colombia, there is a tradition that either just in the lead up to midnight or after midnight, people eat 12 grapes, one to signify each month of the new year, and they say a prayer with each grape. That explains why there were so many grape sellers in the streets of Cartagena that night. However, I didn't pick up any grapes, and Juliana told me that her family did have some, but they had forgotten them and left them back at the accommodation. Anyway, I had a great 12 months after that, and I hope Juliana's family did too. It was perfect. At the start of the year, I was right at the top of South America with friends, and although the size of the celebration wasn't massive, the atmosphere was unmatched. We went out for a few drinks afterwards. Everything in Cartagena was open until late that night, and eventually returned to Juliana and her family's rented apartment. We spent the evening with them trying to teach me how to dance. And eventually I got an Uber back to my hostel at about 6 a.m, just in time to watch the first sunrise over Cartagena of 2025. The 1st of January, I had to check out of the hostel at 10 a.m, so I set an alarm for 9 a.m, hoping to catch 3 hours sleep and then wake up and have enough time to get ready and check out. The alarm did indeed go off at 9 a.m, and I closed my eyes for a minute and then opened them again, and it was 9:45. Panic stations. I managed to get my stuff together, check out, and then ask the kind reception staff if they would be okay with me leaving my bag at reception and I could use a shower, which they kindly obliged. They also mentioned that up on the rooftop there was free caldo de costilla, which is a beef broth, which is considered in Colombia to be the perfect hangover cure. I didn't have the energy to climb the steps, so I went to the ground floor cafe and managed to get some toast into me before heading towards the bus station. I certainly wasn't the only one heading out of Cartagena that day. A lot of people were bound for Santa Marta, having had their New Year's party in Cartagena, and then heading to the more beautiful beaches further up the coast. So I got to the bus station and it was a situation of sort of controlled chaos, but I managed to get myself onto a bus. While I was waiting there, I also ran into and got to know Sergio, a traveler from Peru, and his friend Malu, who was traveling with him. They had also been out for New Year's Eve the night before and were also headed to Santa Marta, so we ended up on the same bus together. As we pulled into Santa Marta, there was a man on the bus asking about a town called Minca, which is near Santa Marta, but I think from what I know it's more of a hill station. I was shattered. So we pulled into the bus station and I was getting off the bus when this guy, I'm pretty sure he was Australian, was sitting there sort of like looking around dazed and confused saying, "Does anyone want to go to Minca? I want to go to Minca." I was way too tired to be dealing with that shit. Perhaps it was cosmic karma for my insensitivity towards his plight, because the universe started to make its own plans. I walked from the bus station towards my hostel, and it was there that I got caught in the middle of a huge rainstorm and ended up having to take shelter in a pharmacy for at least an hour while the roads started to drain of all the water that had emptied into them. I eventually made it to the wonderful Masaya hostel in Santa Marta, where I arrived soaked but relieved to reach my bed. Sergio and Malu and I had talked about going out to the beach the next day, but by the time I woke up that morning, they had already left. They had headed to a beach that I couldn't quite figure out how to get to, so instead I woke up, had breakfast, and then made my way to Rodadero, where I lay on the sand and let all the stress and tiredness flow out of my body. I sunbathed, I lounged on the sand, I enjoyed a delicious seafood lunch, and swam in the silky Caribbean waters alongside thousands of other people as the sun sank low into the horizon. That evening, I returned to Santa Marta and went out for dinner with Sergio and Malu, who had just come back from the beach. While we were there, we started making plans to go to Tayrona National Park, a nearby place of stunning natural beauty, which is one of the highlights of visiting Santa Marta. It was going to be, for all of us, our last day in Santa Marta, so we wanted to make the most of it. I already knew that I wanted to see Tayrona National Park, but I hadn't really figured out the logistics. Sergio and Malu had, and they told me that they were going to be on a bus at 6 a.m. the next morning and then heading out to the turn-off to the national park. 2 days after New Year's Eve, we hauled ourselves out of our beds and got to the bus station for the pre-dawn journey to a small village where our hike into Tayrona National Park would begin. I'm still not sure how any of us mustered up the energy, to be honest. The hike into the park took at least 3 hours. It wasn't particularly steep, but it wasn't completely flat either. There were muddy sections that required removing our shoes and small streams to cross. Considering we were running on just a few hours sleep, it was a challenge, but we made it. The beaches and rainforest of the Tayrona National Park were breathtaking. It truly felt like the South America of my dreams. The park is rich in biodiversity. We saw monkeys, sloths, and all sorts of exotic flora. Walking through the park, I marveled at the towering trees with their buttress roots, vines dangling through the canopy, and the jungle atmosphere all around. Tayrona National Park is at its best in the sunny weather, and unfortunately, the night before we went there, it had rained. The beaches were still wet, and the seas were choppy due to a weather system moving through. In retrospect, it was lucky that this was our last day in Santa Marta, because had we stayed longer, we might have been caught up in the storm. Nevertheless, even with the imperfect conditions, it was a magical final day on Colombia's Caribbean coast. On my last morning in Santa Marta, I went out and got for breakfast an arepa dulce con anís, the sweet arepa for which Santa Marta is famous. Thanks to my friend Natasha for recommending this place. It was a very simple roadside operation, but these arepas were so tasty that I could happily have filled up on them alone for breakfast. However, it was time to keep moving. I had really wanted to continue further up the Caribbean coast to the northernmost point of the South American continent, in an area of Colombia known as La Guajira, an area of bizarre natural beauty where desert meets the Caribbean. However, I had to sacrifice that in order to visit my next destination, which was attending an absolutely insane festival at the complete other end of the country. Make sure that you tune in again next time on Latin America Diaries for a special episode. I'll be dropping it next Wednesday, the 7th of January, and when I will be revealing where I flew to from Santa Marta. See you then.